Prepped. I know y'all have some questions prepped. I'm going to run through my questions. We're going to have sort of a conversation, but if any of you want to jump into the conversation, you have a burning question that you want to ask, just throw a hand up. Like, I don't want this to be you all listening to me the entire time, so we'll make this as interactive as possible. Go ahead.
So, is it like you ask your question first and then we get to dive in, or is it just...
If you have a burning question that you want to ask, throw your hand up, and if the timing's good, we'll get you involved. We want to make this a conversation, and we want to make it relevant to all of you. So keep that in mind, all right? So does that work for everybody? Sound good? All right, so we're gonna jump into this. So Tamara Best is a senior editorial leader working at the intersection of journalism, emerging technology, and audience innovation. She has shaped how AI and storytelling come together, from launching creative partnerships with Netflix and Paramount to developing ethical guidelines for large language models in public-facing products. We have a lot to talk about. Previously a senior staff editor at the New York Times, Tamara reported on culture, identity, and activism within communities of color, work that earned her a Publishers Award and contributed to an Emmy-nominated project. She has also driven content strategy across Facebook, Instagram, amplifying opportunities for diverse creatives. Her cultural commentary has taken her to stages with Spotify, Showtime, and Essence Festival, and she is currently based in New York, where she is developing her debut play, Hinesbury Hill. Did I get that right? Hinesbury Hill. Awesome. Well, thanks, Tamara. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Hey, y'all. Okay, we need to do a little better than that. I'm a Southern girl, so we're going to try this again, call and response style. Hey, y'all. Hey. Awesome. Much better. I also just want to say, if anyone has questions and for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable asking them in a public forum, please come see me afterward. I'm happy to stay around and chat.
Appreciate that. That's awesome. So let's kick this off. So your current title is content engineer at Meta. AI content engineer?
Yes.
So AI content engineer, what does that mean?
Yeah, the phrase is a really interesting one, and the role is something that's fairly new in the industry, but essentially what it means is that I think about how content experiences live across Meta's platforms, so really thinking about it both from a front-facing perspective and also a back-end perspective. And so what that can look like is, for the Paramount and Netflix projects that I led, really thinking about how do we create AIs for these major franchises. So that's something that you as an audience would see, because you would be engaging with it and talking to those AIs. The back-end version of that experience is thinking about what is the scope of what these AIs are going to talk about, what do we not want them to talk about. So the role is very much front-facing in terms of thinking about what the audience is going to see and interact with, but also what are the guidelines, the parameters, and the things that underpin that experience on the back end.
Amazing. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So from the consumer-facing side, what does that look like, them interacting with these AI tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about any of the major platforms, not just Meta, like ChatGPT included and a bunch of others, but I'll use Meta as an example. There's something called AI Studio, where you can go and you can talk to a number of AIs about a variety of things. So for example, for Paramount, I led a project to create an AI for Gladiator 2 when that movie came out, and so you would have been able to go to AI Studio or to go to their Instagram page and start up a conversation with an AI that was meant to help you be like the best version of like Gladiator in your life. So similar to if you were texting a friend, how many of you all use like AI in that capacity to talk to chatbots? Doesn't have to be Meta AI, no judgment. Okay, so that's one way that you can think of it. Similar to how you would text a friend about something, you can talk to AI chatbots in a similar fashion to do everything from get advice, work through issues, like whatever the case may be. So that's like the front-facing way in which you would use it.
So through the example of Gladiator, this sort of presents like a really interesting new way for fans of that franchise to like engage with the content. And so like what would be like the type of responses one would get? Would you be like interacting with characters from the film or asking questions about that? Like what does that look like?
Absolutely. So for Paramount and Gladiator, what's really interesting is obviously Gladiator is a really huge franchise. It's something that everyone knows. And so I think one of the interesting challenges for brands in general, not just Paramount in this case, is thinking about how do you take a beloved piece of IP and bring it to audiences in new and unexpected ways so that you're able to bring in people who do know the franchise, but then also people who might be curious. And so in this particular case, the AI was essentially a trainer and used a lot of the tenets from the original Gladiator movie to help you think through and work through like issues that you were dealing with in your life, which was really interesting.
That's really interesting. And so then from the back end perspective, what does that look like in terms of create? Well, to whatever degree you're allowed to talk about that, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I will say, generally speaking, when thinking about brands and creating IP, they obviously are really protective, right? They've worked on these things for a really long time. There are actors and creators who are very closely affiliated with them. There are brand safety concerns, as any brand would have. I think we're seeing that a lot in general with the hesitancy that a lot of brands have with engaging with AI. What is this going to mean for my IP? Like, what if this AI says something crazy and now all of a sudden it's going viral and I'm all over every social media platform? So those were a lot of the considerations that we took into consideration, but also things in general that brands would think about.
And so I'm just curious, like for the owners of these IPs, what are some of their biggest concerns? Is it like loss of ownership of the IP and sort of like having AI let that run rampant, or like what are some of their major concerns?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of major brand concerns are the things that you might expect. What if the AI says something disparaging about the actor in the film, right? You certainly don't want that. What if an AI speaks on a rumor that's in the news about the company, about its earnings, about any particular thing in that way? So brand safety can really touch on a variety of things. So what does it actually mean for the AI in this case to say something problematic, if you will, about either the franchise, the company, the people that are involved in the project? Maybe you don't want your AI commenting on political and social issues, right? Because that's not something that you do as a brand. And so brand safety can really run the gamut in that way.
Interesting, interesting. So I want to come back to some of the ethical issues with AI at some point, but I think let's take a step back and, looking at your LinkedIn, you have this really robust background in what would be considered sort of like traditional journalism outlets, like, Daily Beast, New York Times. And so first, can you talk a little bit about like what you did with the New York Times and what that experience was like? And secondly, I'd love to learn about the transition from going from like a traditional journalism media outlet to a very tech-focused outlet like Meta.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm going to take a step back for a second though. So I'm first generation American, and for me, my family's from the Caribbean, and so some of you may or may not understand what I'm about to say. In a lot of families, you sort of have three options. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, or you're going to be an engineer. So I see some of y'all smiling. Y'all know. So being a journalist was not exactly on my parents' bingo card. But at 14, I decided that that's what I wanted to do, and I was sitting on the front steps, and I said, I want to work for the New York Times, but obviously didn't necessarily think it was going to happen. So I've really approached my career through what I call intentional flexibility, and here's what I mean by that. Intentional in the sense that my North Star and my why has always been very, very clear to me, which is in part influenced by like where my family's from. So really thinking about what does it mean to tell stories of women and communities of color? That's my why. And so in any role that I've ever pursued, I've always thought about how I can honor that in some shape, form, or fashion. I say flexibility because I also haven't looked for the perfect role, right? I think perfect can be the enemy of good. Like sometimes good enough is okay, and waiting for the perfect thing will keep you stuck and keep you still. So I've always thought about what is the tool or the tools that I want to have in my toolbox, and then go from there. So the New York Times honestly gave me the best grounding that I could have asked for as a journalist. I started there right out of school, which is insane. And it was, the thing that I tell people is that it's like being thrown in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when you don't know how to swim. But what a great opportunity. And I really took a tour of the newsroom. So I did everything from working on, the foreign desk was my first assignment in the middle of the Syrian war. So what a welcome. And from there I did a little bit of everything. I worked on the national desk during the Obama years, the style desk for Fashion Week. I'm very into fashion. Worked on the culture desk, which was probably my favorite experience, truthfully, because I think that culture coverage says something about the way we live and who we are as a people and where we're going. And so it was a really great experience. The only thing I didn't really do was sports, because I tell people I'm a tennis fan and I'm a college football fan. And other than that, I know nothing. So it was great.
So let's stick with the New York Times for a minute, because I love this idea of you being thrown in the middle of Atlantic and not knowing how to swim. So how did you navigate that? Like, what were some of those challenges early on, and how did you push through that?
Yeah, I literally started at the bottom, y'all. That's not an exaggeration. I started as a news assistant, which meant I was answering phones. But what it also meant was that I had an opportunity to get to know the editors in the newsroom. And I really took advantage of that because one of the things that you will come to learn in your career, whether it's corporate or entrepreneurship, is that your relationships and your network is everything. And so that for me was a starting point, and it really allowed me to be a sponge in that way. People knew that I was a news assistant, and so any question that I asked didn't seem quote unquote dumb. It's like, she's a news assistant, of course she's curious and she wants to know. So I used that to my advantage. I also found mentors at the times. It's a very big organization, there are a lot of eyes on it, and so it was really important to me to have people that I could go to and be very honest about what I was dealing with and where I needed support and where I needed help. But then similarly finding advocates in the newsroom who gave me the opportunity to write and saw something in me beyond where I was in that current moment. And so those are a couple of things that I did.
Amazing. We've got some student questions. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna be the runner of the mic right now, and he'll
Awesome.
come over here.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna be fine, check out voice notes.
No, it's for the recording.
Oh,
So
okay. So, hello,
I see.
this be, is
Got
this?
it. You're good.
Okay, so I've looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I do have a couple questions regarding that, what you were just talking about. So, you've led large editorial teams at places like, as you said, the New York Times and Daily Beast, and also made projects like Lift Black Voices. What lessons about leadership have been most important to you while dealing with both traditional and problems like technology?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons that I have learned is that you have to lead with humanity, right? Problems are problems, but people are at the heart of those problems. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that the person is the problem, but you have to be able to work and communicate with that person to figure out how to best solve the problem. So I always try to lead from a point of understanding. I've never gone into any situation with the presumption that I have the answers. So when I went to the Daily Beast, for example, I spent the first 30 or 60 days just doing a listening tour because I really wanted to understand what was happening in the newsroom, what were pain points, what were things that people really enjoyed, what did they want to change. And I find that when you go in with an open spirit as a leader and you're willing to be as much of a student as you are a leader, that makes a big difference. And also just approaching people like in a very like normal way, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Is this
Yeah, you're good.
so my question was, you said you worked for a lot of like traditional media news networks. How was it shifting from that to a more AI driven field? Was it jarring, or did it kind of flow right into that? How was that for you?
It was insane. I say all the time, if anyone would have told me that I would have been working in tech 6 years ago, I would have laughed in their face, and then I would have apologized because that is not how my West Indian manners would have taught me to behave. But it was a really big leap. But I think in a lot of ways, it was the right leap because I was able to build on the grounding that I got at the New York Times and then the leadership at the Daily Beast to think about, okay, how does this content work on the platforms that we all live on, right? What does it mean to meet people where they are with content on these platforms? So it was a bit of an adjustment, but I actually really like that challenge. And what I mean by that is every role that I've taken, I've been a little bit scared, if I'm being really honest. And I like that because what it means is that there's room for me to stretch and room for me to grow. And I also did a lot of reading to your question about how did I make the leap. I really wanted to understand what it was I was stepping into. I wanted to like better understand like how content lived on the platform, how people were interacting with it. So I found as much like public facing information as I could to begin to give me some ground knowledge.
Got a couple other student questions, but I'm
Yeah.
going to interject really
Sure.
quickly. And so when you made the transition from the, was it from the New York Times to Meta?
From the Daily
From the
Beast.
Daily Beast to Meta. What was the scariest part? Because you said in every role you've taken, there's always been something that's scary. So what was the scariest there?
I had just never worked at a tech company, right? I was a journalist through and through, and in my mind, I was like, what does it mean to be a journalist at a tech company? I don't know. I know what it means to be a journalist in a journalism institution. And so how would that translate? How would I be received? in my mind, engineers speak a different language. They don't, they speak English, but initially for me it felt like French, which I speak 2 words of, despite the fact that Paris is my favorite city and I'm there entirely too much. So that was one of the challenges, figuring out how to translate what I was hearing. So I would often message people on the side after meetings and I would say, what did they just say? What does that mean? Or I would set one-on-one meetings with people, and I still do that, spoiler alert, but I don't know or I don't quite understand what someone has said so that I can connect the dots. And I think that that humility is really, really important. Again, whether you're going into a corporate space or as an entrepreneur, you have to be honest about what you don't know and be willing to tap people so that you can get the information that you need.
Yeah, I think that's a really profound point. It's like, own what you don't know, because it's just going to snowball, and before long you won't know anything, right?
You don't want it to snowball.
One other quick question. Did you find there was a really big cultural shift coming from like New York Times Daily Beast to a tech company?
Yeah, I think one of the big culture shifts for me is that tech environments are very relaxed in terms of the dress code, at least, or the way in which people dress. And so I was very much used to dressing up for work, if that makes sense. And so when I walked in for the first time and I saw people in hoodies and jeans and sweatpants, I was like, oh, I'm going to need to make some adjustments to my wardrobe, or I'm really going to stick out in a way that I don't want to. So that's a smaller thing, but I think those things actually matter, because the way in which you enter into an environment and choose to adapt, and I use adapt intentionally because I think to the extent that it's possible, you should always try to be as much of yourself as you can in whatever environment that you're in. And at the same time, there are certain things that you can do that can make your life just a little bit easier, right? So I started coming to work in blazers and jeans, right? Instead of cape jumpsuits or, you know, whatever it was I was wearing at the New York Times. And those small things helped me feel a little bit better as I was transitioning in. It sounds silly, but
No, it makes a difference.
yeah.
It does make a difference. Got a couple more student questions here.
So you talked a little bit about what some of the challenges were making the transition. I'm kind of interested in what sort of the inflection point, or sort of like what prompted the pivot in the first place from journalism to a more tech-based industry.
Yeah, honestly, I think it was an openness, to be quite frank. I've always felt like my career, to the point Rob made at the beginning, has always been at the intersection of content and emerging technologies. And so I was at a point where I was really curious, and there was so much conversation in the journalism industry about the role of platforms and how content was being disseminated, that I wanted to better understand from the inside what that actually looked like and the way in which these platforms were thinking about content. So it started from a curious place, and I would also say both from a corporate context and from an entrepreneurial one, that's a really great place to start. If you're curious about something and that curiosity doesn't leave you, pay attention to that, because it's trying to tell you something about where either you should go or something you should consider on your journey.
So I just want to say, talking about your entrepreneurship and you originally being a journalist, so I would like, hopefully in my future, to become an author. So I guess, can you correct me?
You're good.
I guess my question to you would be, how originally did you get your start in, well, I mean, you did go with the New York Times, like how originally did you get your start in, like, actually publishing something, you know?
So my first published piece was actually in high school. And this goes back to the why that I was talking about. I was growing up in Atlanta, and I was a member of Care for Teens. And we took a volunteer trip to Guatemala for a week. And I kept a journal while I was there. And when I came back, I wrote a first-person piece for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And it was about everything that I saw. And when I saw the response that it got and the way that it moved people to want to do something within their own communities, I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, which is what prompted the moment on the stairs at 14 saying I wanted to work for the New York Times. So that was the start of it. And then, like, I imagine some of your fellow students on campus, I worked at the student newspaper. I basically lived there. There was this running joke. I went to the University of Georgia. There was a running joke that if you couldn't find me, that I was at the Red and Black. And 9 times out of 10, that was the truth. And so that gave me a really good head start in a sense because we were publishing every day pretty much. And so I had a lot of opportunities to write a lot of different things. And then from there I did a series of internships. My first internship was actually with the New York Times. I was going to tell this story closer to the end, but since you asked, I'll tell it now. I did some work for Essence during the 2008 election, and I really wanted to intern there very, very badly. And so I applied and I didn't get it. And I stayed in bed for like 2 days in the most dramatic fashion, didn't want to get out of bed, it was a whole thing. And then someone mentioned to me that the New York Times had an internship open. And I was like, okay, well I'll apply and we'll see what happens, and then I got it. And that was really the start of everything, that changed everything. But I say that I use that story to illustrate how sometimes we think all we need is a yes. But sometimes it's actually the no that ends up being the catalyst that really sets you on your way. I don't know what my career would look like had I gotten that internship. I would be on a different path, right? But I never would have ended up at the New York Times. And the New York Times is really the thing that changed everything for me.
That's great. So I'm going to change topics a little bit. I want to get into the AI world a bit, and so we can dive into that. I've got some questions for you. So first and foremost, we know everybody has a different feeling about AI, positive or negative. What's your overall stance on Gen AI, and just in a generalization? What?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about it, to be very honest with you. I think it has the ability to be a really awesome assistive tool. I think it has the ability to be a force multiplier for brands. And I think it has the potential to be a lever for connection. And I say a and not the because I think there's no replacing this, right? Or what it means to be able to call your best friend at 1 a.m. in the morning when you need advice or someone to talk to. So I'm very excited about it from that lens.
So diving a little deeper, coming from a journalism background, someone who writes, what's your perspective on AI in writing?
I don't want to see it.
You don't want to see
in
it?
writing. I'm very much a traditionalist in that way. I think, again, it works great as an assistive tool. I'll use the New York Times as an example. Their head of product was on a podcast recently and talking about how they used AI to sift through a bunch of data before the election that their reporters were then able to use to incorporate in their reporting. And what I really like about that is that it doesn't take the human out of the loop. I don't think at this point there is any substitute for human judgment, for the nuances, cultural or otherwise, that only humans really, really understand. How many of you all have seen the recent Vaseline ad that went viral? Okay, definitely check it out after this. But I use that as an example to say there are some things that AI just can't quite do or don't quite get. And so I like it as an assistive tool, but I would not want to see AI written articles, for example. I think things like AI voices on articles make a lot of sense. It takes a tremendous amount of time to record your voice for an article or anything else, and so that makes sense to me because it's also not diluting the work itself, but rather adding to it.
And so you talk about AI being an assistive tool. Do you see it having a role in assisting writers to, still being the human in the loop, get their content in the world? Like, where's sort of the ethical line for you to AI involvement when it comes to specifically journalism?
Yeah, I would say summarization is fine. And again, you see that with the New York Times and the Washington Post, where if they have a live blog, they might be using AI to summarize different points within the live blog. And that I think, again, keeps the integrity of the work and at the same time gives the journalist one less thing to do that they don't necessarily need to do, if that makes sense. So for me, I think when the AI literally becomes a part of the work and the words and the thoughts are not coming from the writer, for me, that's when it feels like a line.
How many of you are sort of in the same wavelength? Just throw a hand up if you feel like you're kind of in the same wavelength. Yeah, just curious. So what would you say are some of the biggest ethical concerns from your perspective about, just generally about generative AI, not specifically with writing?
Yeah, I would say the thing that I worry most about, and I imagine most people probably worry about this, is the harm that it can cause, the real world harm. I think we've seen the damage, for example, that misinformation can do. And the great thing about emerging technologies is that they are great democratizers in some ways, and they offer opportunity. But what people choose to do with that opportunity really matters. And so I do worry about the proliferation of misinformation via AI and or how it can be used to cause real world harm. The thing I am curious about though is to see the way in which AI ends up impacting critical thinking. And what I mean by that is I love a good intellectual sparring match with my husband, with my best friends. I love the process similarly of writing and like really working to edit and find just the right words. AI has the ability to rapidly close the gap between I can't quite find the right way to say this phrase or sharpen this argument. And I think that that can be helpful. But for me at least, there's something really great about the aha moment. And I am curious about how much of that we might lose. And that's a very difficult thing to measure, but you're seeing a lot of schools and universities begin to grapple with that question. And so that's the thing that I'm curious about.
Yeah, that's something we've been talking about in my class very deeply is like the effect on agency. And one of the things we talk about is everybody at a personal level has to sort of draw a line in the sand of what they will and won't use AI for, because when you start to compromise on that, it starts to creep in more and more. So where is that kind of line in the sand for you?
My personal interactions with my loved ones. So I had a friend who sent me a message about something she was going through, and it would have been very, very easy to use an AI chatbot to say, like, write a heartfelt response to this thing. I will not do that. I won't do that. I think there are things that just need to come from you, however imperfect it might be. And so for me, that's my line. How I respond to like my loved ones and my friends. I do use it for writing emails because it's just very efficient and makes things much faster, but for one-on-one interactions like that, it's a no for me.
And do you use AI much in your personal life outside of work?
Yeah, I use it all the time.
And what are some of your favorite use cases?
One of my favorite use cases other than emails is logistics. I just feel like there aren't enough hours in the day, and sometimes I need someone or something who can help me figure out how to get from A to B much faster. And so I use it for that. I love to travel, and so if I'm stuck on an itinerary or trying to figure out, okay, I only have this many days, like, do I really need to go see this? I'll use it for that too. I'm curious to know what y'all use it for. What are you guys using AI for? There are no wrong answers, by the way.
Just shout it out whenever
Yeah.
you're ready. Go ahead.
I use it for like just general questions, sort of like a substitute Google. Instead of looking up on Google and scrolling through, you can just get the answer right there.
So looking up through Google, in place of Google, what else?
I'm actually about to call someone as tribute because I saw her smile, so I hope she'll forgive me for putting her on the spot. This young, yes, what do you use it for?
Sometimes when I feel like, how can I say this? I use it to like ask, what do you think about if this person said this to me?
Yeah. Anybody else?
Anybody
And I
else?
actually have this.
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
going to give you the mic for the question, if that's okay.
So like on social media, I
Yeah.
keep seeing like, don't share your personal things with the AI, like just like what's going on in your life, and what it can lead to, like why we're not supposed to, like what are they gonna do with my information?
So every company has its own policies about how they handle data and privacy, so I can't speak to like what platforms are doing writ large other than to say that there are safeguards in place. But I think to Rob's point, like this is where figuring out where your line is really important. You will not see my son's face on Beyonce's internet. It's not happening, period. Because I don't want to worry at all about how that might be used now or in the future with any technology. I mean, he'll get to a point where he can decide for himself. He's 4, so he doesn't get to decide now. But I think that's where like determining your own like personal line comes in. I mean, you can also take the time if you want to look at the terms, like the privacy terms for whatever the respective platform is, and then decide if you're okay with the parameters that they've set forth. So.
Oh, you go ahead, Dave.
Hey, how you doing? So honestly, I'm just a little bit confused because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you had a project through Gladiator 2 where you made an AI and people can go to it and kind of figure out their problems and stuff, right? That's what you said.
Yeah.
So do you think that's ethically okay for people to go to AIs with their problems? Because you talked about how we should really be using AI to kind of like, because they don't really have emotions and they're kind of a yes and tool. So I was wondering your thought on that.
Yeah, if I said that I don't think we should be using AI for that, I definitely misspoke. I think it's fine for people to go to AIs for advice, but to your point, it's very much a yes and experience, and this is where I think having wise counsel in your own life, in real life, really matters. But for example, I woke up recently one day, I think it was 4 a.m., and I just had something on my mind. I'm not calling my best friend or waking up my husband at 4 a.m., right? And so I very quickly, and I only see my therapist once a week, right? I'm definitely not calling her at 4 a.m. So I just pulled out my phone and used a chat bot to say like, hey, what do you think? And I think the other thing to keep in mind when you're talking about advice and like when you're going to a chat bot is, are you actually like willing to engage in the back and forth, right? I think a lot of people can use these tools because they want, it's confirmation bias, right? They want the AI to confirm what it is they're thinking or they're feeling. And I sometimes will make the conscious decision when I'm having an interaction to say, are you sure? Because so-and-so said X, Y, and Z, and I see some validity in their argument, but I don't know how I feel. So I think as much as it can be helpful in terms of like going to it for advice, I think you also have to be really honest about why you're going to it for advice. And is it the case that you're doing that because you actually don't want to hear, I won't say the truth, but maybe a view that's divergent from what it is that you're feeling?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, if you have a question, go ahead.
So I also want to ask, since you've worked with generative AI at Meta, how do you think AI will change the way we tell stories about culture and identity in the next few years?
Good question.
That is a really good question. I'm not sure, to be really honest with you, but my hope is that it will provide opportunities for it to be more expansive and more inclusive. That would be my hope. And that's always my hope with emerging technologies, which is how do we put these in as many hands as possible so that you have that opportunity. But I'm not sure, but that's my hope.
Yeah, so I'm curious about something, when you think about some of the issues with AI outside of the ethical issues, although these are ethical issues, you get to things like digital divide and access to the tools. And I think one of the things we've been talking about is making sure all cultures and all voices are represented in the training and the model. So have you experienced any sort of like discrepancies in that, or do you have any concerns about like underrepresentation of different cultural voices in these models?
Yeah, that's always a concern, and I think it's a concern in any technology, and it's why having as diverse and inclusive as a team for whichever company or model it is really, really important. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is like the role of voice in AIs. As I talk to different AIs across platforms, it's been really interesting to see the way in which generalizations, tropes, and stereotypes are really leaned on. I grew up in Atlanta, but I'm originally from New York. And so it was really interesting as I was having a conversation with an AI on a platform, the way in which they over-indexed on certain Southern phrases and made assumptions about what it thought I wanted to hear or was thinking because of the knowledge that I was from Atlanta, or that I grew up in Atlanta. So that is something that I do worry about, but I think on some level it's on all of us in small ways to, I won't say try to course correct for that, but to certainly think about the way in which we're engaging and the feedback that we give. So a lot of the AI tools that are available now on the market, you can give feedback as a user, and companies look at those things, right? And so I would say if there's an experience that you have and it really doesn't sit well with you, say something.
And that's one of the things we talk about in class is like, we're not going to fix issues of bias and misrepresentation in the digital divide, but awareness. Awareness is the most important thing. So, okay, great. Does anybody have any questions? I'll dive into some other things unless anybody has. Oh.
And on this side.
Yeah, we'll grab it and then we'll go.
So, you were talking a bit earlier about AI with advice and giving advice to people. I was wondering where you draw the line with that, because something we talk about is how there's some people who use like AI for everything. Like, what should I have for lunch today? Type it in ChatGPT or something, or they use it for literally everything. So where would you draw the line for advice from AI?
It's very much a personal decision, but I would say for me, things that have serious consequence are where I draw the line, and or I make sure that I seek additional counsel. And what I mean by that is, for example, I'm not taking financial advice from an AI bot. I might ask it a question, but then I'm getting on the phone with a financial advisor, right? Because this is what they do. Or, oh my gosh, my toe hurts. What is this AI bot saying? Okay, that's great. I mean, and that's like akin to going to Google. But I'm still calling the doctor, right? I'm still showing up at their office. And so for me personally, that's where I draw the line, things that have very real impact like to me in my life. So thinking about like finances or health, I think are like good places to, even if you're not going to draw the line, making sure that you are getting additional insight from a qualified professional.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
What's going on left side? Y'all quiet. We
So,
need some coffee.
in terms of AI, what are you working on now?
I can't answer that question. But what I will say is I'm very excited about products on the market that I think are helping to further connection. So I love my Meta Ray-Ban glasses. I use them particularly when I travel. I was in Kauai this summer and I am very afraid of helicopters. Like, have never gotten on one. But you can't see most of Kauai from the ground. You have to do it from the air. And I was like, well, guess I'm gonna have to get on this helicopter. But because I had my glasses, in the moments where I was very scared and closed my eyes, I was able to just press the button on the side and record. And now I have the most beautiful, breathtaking like videos of Kauai from the air that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And if I had my phone out, I would have been trying to really making sure I was getting the right angle and doing all those things. So I'm excited about products that allow us to be present but still capture moments. Yeah.
Cool.
So you mentioned a lot about how you can make personal choices to mitigate AI misuse and stuff like that. My main question is sort of about people as a conglomerate and sort of thinking about like, as a whole, you think about sort of the misuse of like social media and how that's contributed to mental illness, and like even a more basic example, like the speed limit doesn't exist to stop the best drivers from going slower. So how do you respond to sort of the idea that the opportunity cost of AI being used by people who are equipped to handle the drawbacks and the risks versus maybe the amount of people that aren't equipped to handle it and might suffer because of it?
I think it's a really good question, and I don't say this jokingly, but that's above my pay grade, right? And what I mean by that, though, is that I think this is where the role of policy and lawmakers becomes really important, and also where the role of organizations who focus on ethics that are willing to hold these different companies to account for their policies and what they're allowing and not allowing becomes really important. But I don't think that that is or can be on any one particular person. I think you have to have entities that are working from different angles, so to speak, to course correct for the very things that you're referencing. It's a really good question. Any questions on this side? I know we're like talking to this side a lot, but I just want to make sure we're not leaving anybody out. And I can't like see everyone over here. Okay, cool.
So I kind of want to top off of both of the questions. But let's say metaphorically, right? You can take all of AI as a whole, and you could take, let's say this, I guess like psychology, just like the human mindset, you know, because you're talking about how like AI is basically, it's sort of like a servant where it isn't really going to give you much pushback. It's kind of just going to be like a yes man, you know, like you said, yes and. So if you can metaphorically, I guess, give AI the knowledge to sort of assist people when it comes to like really like deep psychological problems, because I've seen like on media where they report that people are using AI with like therapy. And do you think that like it's possible, or do you think AI would need some like really advanced training with that, or is that something AI just can't have because AI is not human, and that's something that is just unique to the human soul that, I mean, like, metaphorically, you just can't take it, put it in a bottle, and just throw it at AI.
I think that with advanced training, there's a lot that's possible. I think we continue to see quite literally in like 6 months' time how much more advanced a model can be. And at the same time, to your point, I don't think that there are substitutes for certain things. And I see my therapist every week. An AI chatbot cannot do what she does. It simply can't. So I do think that yes, through advanced training, can you get closer? Sure. But I'm just one of those people that believes that there's not a substitute for human interaction. AI can give you approximations, but AI is not going to understand the side eye, right? That I've just given my best friend, or the look that I give her when we're across a room, that says everything without saying anything at all, right? Or understand the difference when my sigh is one of resignation and when it's one of I'm just really tired, right? And that's what I'm talking about earlier when I was talking about the importance of nuance. So.
Yeah, I think that's important and profound to keep in mind as well. So a couple other questions. We'll open up to more questions. One is, and I don't know if you're allowed to say this, but do you have a particular favorite AI chatbot that you use?
You know I can't answer that.
I just figured I would try to see, just to see.
Yeah.
You know, in our class, we talk about being prepared to go out into the world, both from a personal and professional level, to use AI ethically and responsibly. What advice do you have for the students to maintain that as they graduate and start businesses and go out in the world and work for businesses?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is to think of it, one, as an assistive tool, but what is the force multiplier? I think where a lot of brands and businesses fall down is that there's so much on the marketplace, and so you're chasing whatever the new thing is. But I think being really clear on your mission and who it is that you are serving is going to allow you to stay very focused in the way that you need to get your work done.
And so let's have a hypothetical situation here.
Sure.
Let's say students in my class, we talk for an entire semester about the ethical issues and how to navigate that in a professional setting. They go out and they get a job, and they're working for a company that's implementing AI tools, and some of the things that company are doing don't align with the ethics that we've spoken about in class. How would you suggest they navigate that with their employers? I know that it's above their pay grade is sort of part of that conversation, but I mean, what advice do you have for them?
I would say two things. The first one is hopefully you have a manager who's really receptive to feedback. And I think that would be a great place to start if you have concerns, whether it's AI or otherwise. But one of the things that I've learned about being in management and leadership is that when you come to them with an issue, come with a solution too, right? So don't just raise the issue, but come with a potential alternative. So that would be the first thing I would say. And then the second thing, and this is more of a broader philosophical thing to the point that some of these questions have raised, you have to decide what your line is, right? And you'll find that both in corporate spaces and in entrepreneurship, not just with AI, but with other things, like what is the line that you're not going to cross? And depending on what it is, you might decide, you know what, maybe this company isn't for me. Maybe I need to start looking for a new job. So I would say in the micro, if you can, have a conversation with your manager or a peer or someone of influence in the organization who has the ability to hear and be receptive. But if something feels like a red line for you, I think then you have to have a harder internal conversation.
Makes sense. Getting back to the favorite chatbot question, do you have a particular favorite meta AI solution or tool or chatbot?
I love using it to write emails. I know that that's not like fun and cool and it's very, very basic, but it just saves a lot of time. And anything that I can do to get back 20, 30 minutes, whatever it is in my day, I am very, very much here for. Yeah.
Excellent. Just curious,
Yeah, yeah.
Just curious. Does anybody have any other questions? Because I'll keep talking. But yeah, okay. Let's get going.
So asking sort of about the ethical uses of AI, do you think there is a point of no return when it comes to how people use AI? Like, as you said, people use AI for everything, and I've seen some people who literally are like that, where they ask what are they going to use for lunch with AI, and if they don't have that, they kind of I've seen mentally shut down. Kind of you need a bit of thinking in your life, but do you see AI as either it's just going to be a point of no return. Like, let's say, for example, there's certain jobs that we've discussed in class that are like, AI is going to take those jobs. So like those low-level like financial jobs, where you're really crunching numbers, that's probably gone, right? Within the next maybe 5 to 10 years. So do you see that, or maybe it's going to be like, I would say maybe like, I guess the calculator and math, where I guarantee you people like when the calculator was first invented and had those awkward moments of it's going to ruin math and everything, and now it's just a regular part of life. Do you think you could see AI counting that, or is it like if people aren't trained ethically on how to use it, it's just going to be a point of no return where we can't get the human aspect of it?
I don't know if there's a point of no return, but I think that there are certainly use cases that are more dangerous than others. So I don't know that there's a point of no return, but it is my sincere hope that as a society, and what I mean by that is like us as individuals drawing our own personal lines, because the tools are there, right? But it's really up to us to decide how we use them, right? So I hope that we as individuals figure out what our lines in the sand are, and we draw them and we stick to them. But I also hope that the institutions, both who are creating these things, but then policymakers, all figure out how to make this as safe as possible. I don't know if there's a point of no return. I hope not, but.
So speaking a little bit more broadly,
Yeah.
you know, you've been extremely entrepreneurial in your
Yeah.
career, continually reinventing yourself, going from the New York Times to the Daily Beast to Meta. So with that in mind, what advice do you have for these students to continue to be entrepreneurial in whatever life brings them?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. What's really interesting is I feel like my corporate career has actually helped me as like an entrepreneur in real life. So it's been really interesting to see how those two things have gone together. Starting with, or going back to what I said at the beginning, that intentional flexibility I think is really, really important. Find your why, because it will really keep you when things get very difficult. And that's not to say that your why has to be strictly related to your work, but it can be helpful. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is just keep putting one foot in front of the other. I realize that sounds incredibly, incredibly basic. Quick question, how many of you have been hiking? Okay, so you know if you go hiking, let's say you're hiking up a mountain, it's gonna take a while to get there, right? And when you get there, you have a couple minutes to enjoy the view, and it's beautiful, and then what do you have to do? You have to come back down the mountain, right? And so if you spend the entire time hiking up only thinking about the view at the top, you miss a lot, right? And I think there's something to be said for sitting in the waiting of a thing and for what it has the ability to develop in you and through you if you let it. So I would say keep putting one foot in front of the other, but also have a very clear vision of what it is that you want. So I would say those are two important things. This is actually not so much related to the business of being an entrepreneur or like career per se, but I do think it's important and it's related. Show up for the people that you love and who love you. There's a time and a season where sometimes, yes, you have to work extremely hard. There was a period of time when I was at the New York Times where people stopped inviting me to things because I was working all the time and I couldn't come. And that came at the cost of relationships. And it worked out, but I say that to say you need to have people in your corner who are going to ride with you passenger seat in the Benz when the idea takes off and when you get the promotion. And you also need people who are going to say, girl, I can come with you to Chipotle and spend this $5 to get this kid's meal because, you know, that's all you can do right now. So that's really, really important. And again, not so much related to the actual career piece, but I think really great, because if you achieve all of this success but you don't have people who love you to share it with, what's the point, right? So going back to the Essence story, my best friend from college, like fast forward years later, Essence invites me to speak at their festival as a moderator, right? For a panel on owning and telling your story. And when I told her, she was like, I'm coming, like instantly, because she had been there. She had seen like the tears when I didn't get the internship and when I landed at the New York Times and like everything along the way. If I hadn't nurtured that relationship, that moment sitting on stage and looking out in the audience and seeing her, it meant everything to me.
Amazing. Any questions? I've got one more, but
I'm also around if folks want to chat
we
after.
got one over here.
Hi.
Hey.
So coming from a marketing major, I know you said before that you're not like a fan of the idea of AI being used in like the writing field. So I want to know from you, like as a personal opinion, what do you think about about all these brands using AI to like generate like these fake humans in their commercials instead of just like hiring real life actors?
I personally don't like it, but I do understand from a bottom line and efficiency standpoint why they might do it. And I want to modify something that I said. I don't like AI in writing in the context of journalism. I don't want to see, personally, AI produced articles. I do understand in a marketing context how it might be helpful in terms of like iterating on taglines, things like that. Like that doesn't bother me, but it's not great to see fake humans in ads for me personally. But I understand why they do it.
Okay, thank you.
I would prefer real people to be hired though, you know?
We have a couple minutes left, and if nobody has any other questions, I'd love to hear a little bit about your play that you're working on.
Oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting that one. So, as I mentioned to you all, I'm first generation American. My family is from Barbados, and the title Hinesbury Hill comes from my childhood. So, like a lot of first generation American children, when school ended, suitcases were packed, and I was sent home for the summer, which was like truthfully one of the best experiences my parents could have given me in hindsight. And so my grandmother grew up on a street called Hinesbury Road, and my paternal grandmother and my maternal grandmother grew up in an area called Coach Hill, so that's where the name comes from. My maternal grandmothers were extremely important to me, and they both died about 10 years ago in the span of 3 weeks. So in the span of 3 weeks, I was back and forth to Barbados, watching like my family grieve, watching my parents grieve, and it was very difficult. And so out of that, I began thinking about what does it mean to lose the matriarchs of your family, and what does it mean for the ties that bond families together and how they fray or how they don't. And so it was originally supposed to be an essay for the New York Times, and I remember the national editor at the time just said to me, like, just go home to Barbados and write. And I couldn't do it. Like, I just emotionally couldn't do it. But what came out of it was a play about a family who gathers over the course of a weekend and everything that happens when families gather together, for better and for worse. So I'm really, really excited about it, and in some ways it is a nod and a tribute to the first generation American experience, but also to my grandmothers.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have any last questions before we? Well, I want to thank you so much for your time and transparency. This has been amazing, enlightening, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, if anybody has any other questions, I'm around. Thanks, y'all.